In today's episode, we look into the life of Albertina Sisulu, who is an anti-apartheid hero and activist. We also peek into her personal life and the beautiful life that she lived with Walter Sisulu.
Well, fortunately for the women of South Africa, they've been in the struggle, waging the struggle hand in hand with the men. There's never been any difference, except that what is more important on the side of the women is that their side, which is more vulnerable to any oppression, the side of the home, the children, and how to bring up the children under such conditions.
Thousands turned out for the funeral of one of South Africa's leading anti-apartheid figures. President Jacob Zuma called Albertina Sisulu a national heroine at the service in Soweto.
You must remember me going in and out jail up to the last case of treason trial, being the only woman amongst 15 men, not fighting for my own interest, for my own family, but for the oppressed people of South Africa as a whole.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Looks and Wisdom Sundays with me, Oluchi B. Hey guys, and welcome to another exciting episode of Looks and Wisdom Sundays with me, Oluchi B. Please say the B, aka the elusive pundit. Honey, how are you feeling? I am feeling good, and I'm actually grateful that you decided to join us over here at Looks and Wisdom. Singabantu abathanda indaba ne-education, so you are at the right place if you like both those things. I appreciate you for tuning in, and I hope you stay until the end of the episode. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe, like, and comment. If you are a returning subscriber, please like and comment, and also share my episodes with those who you think this information might be of value to. Otherwise, guys. We are still covering the wives of anti-apartheid heroes. So the first week I covered Ulimpo Hani, who is the wife of Chris Hani. And last week I actually covered Umamu Nontsikelelo Biko, who is the wife of Steve Biko. This week I'm going to be talking about another Nontsikelelo, Unontsikelelo Albertina Sisulu. And she is the wife of Walter Sisulu. They are both ANC stalwarts and have done a lot for the country. Actually, when I was looking, I don't do research for the next episode until I'm done with the episode that I'm doing because I don't want to confuse my brain. And I was like, actually, I like how different each woman is. These women actually contributed in like vastly different ways. And I was actually so impressed by that because it got me to realize that there was not only one way in which you could contribute to the anti-apartheid movement, whether as a normal person or as a wife of like an anti-apartheid activist. And I was like, I'm glad I actually picked those women. I don't know what next week is going to bring us. I haven't done research on it because I want to get this out. Okay, That
is, although it's going to take a long time, we hope that our government will be able to have the economy in its hands. Because, for instance, as we are now, it's still in the hands of the whites because of the government of national unity that was still together. But we hope, as our president has been going around asking for help for business people to invest in South Africa, we'll be able to boost our economy in our country. And eventually, when we take over completely, in 5 years' time, we'll be the people who will be able to direct our economy in our country.
So Mamo Albertina was actually born in 1918 in Xolobe, outside of the Tsomo district in the Eastern Cape. She is the second born out of 5 children, and she is born from parents Bonilizwe and Monica. So Bonilizwe, her father, was actually a migrant worker, and he used to work in the mines in the Transvaal region. So he was probably working in gold mining or in diamond mining. It doesn't say. And then Monica, we know that Monica actually contracted the Spanish flu virus while she was pregnant with Umamo Albertina, and she didn't recover from that up until her death in the 1940s. So they went on to have 3 additional children after Albertina was born in 1918. So it became a total of 5 children. Because her father was away for long periods of time and her mom was perpetually sick, they were actually raised by their grandparents. In 1926, she actually started her primary school at the Xolobe Primary School. And she was a great student there, to a point that she actually got a bursary for her secondary school. Unfortunately, in 1929, her father actually passed away from a lung disease-related illness. She then went on to the Mariazell College in Matatiela, which was a boarding school from the bursary that she got. And in 1939, she actually finished her matric and was ready to start her next chapter. Before we move on, what I wanted to deduce, because you know we love deducing over here at Looks and Wisdom, is the fact that she had to learn being independent and being resilient and getting the job done at a very young age. From having a father who was not present for most of the year, to having a mom that was sick all the time and having to be raised by grandparents, and having to have your schooling being interrupted all the time because of personal things, might have not been easy. But despite that, she continued being a good student, and she continued excelling in her academic endeavors. And this, for me, symbolizes someone who learned resilience early on and learned being independent and strong. And I don't mean strong by, the new matrix these days of having to take BS even if you don't want to. I mean having the resilience to move through very, very difficult times, even when it looks bleak. And I think these traits actually did help her later on in life as she got involved with the struggle. So she packs her bags and she moves to Johannesburg in 1940 to actually start her nursing training at the Johannesburg General Hospital. I think it's called Charlotte Maxeke Academic Hospital these days. And I wanted to just say quickly, so there used to be 2 parts of the hospital: the non-European wing, which was like the Black people wing, and the Black nurses used to get their training there. And there used to be like the European side where like white people would go. So when she was there, she actually experienced a lot of racism. And this actually sparked her interest in trying to find out what was going on with the country. And then in 1941, she actually meets her future husband, Walter Sisulu, who was actually the first Black real estate agent in South Africa.
We had developed not only love, friendship, but developed friendship that it was going to be very difficult just to think of going to anybody.
And I'm not going to get into Walter Sisulu's situation. I will add his history if it gets us to understand Mamo Albertina better. In 1941 as well, her mom actually passed away. And in her passing away, it actually added to her responsibilities, because between herself, her older sister, and one of the cousins, they actually were now fully responsible for the 3 additional children in the family. And she says because of that responsibility and having 4 children to raise, it doesn't say where the fourth one came from, but I think maybe one of the cousin's siblings, because she does say four. And we know this information because when Walter met her, he actually proposed marriage. And she was like, no, I can't get married because I have this responsibility of these 4 children that I need to raise.
He didn't want to play about with me, I must say. He just wanted to marry me. We were walking down Illof Street one afternoon. I was off. I visited him. He had an office in town. The office was called Sita Investment and Trust Company. When we were walking down, he was taking me back to the hospital. We were holding hands, talking. He started this subject of marrying me. I said, no, I'm not a marrying type. He said, why? Because I've got children to look after. You know, he was holding my hand. He just let my hand go. And he said, how many of those children? I said, there are 4. Meaning you want to help them through their life? I said, yes. That's what my father has asked me to do. He said, okay. Do you mind if we do that together? Do you mind me helping you? I said...
Her mom passing away in 1941 must have not been a great experience. But fortunately for her, this is around the same time she actually meets her future husband. And in their meeting and in their love situation, they actually do become best friends. And I'm not going to get too deep in their love story, but it's one of the most beautiful ones. I will link as many clips as possible because I was like, oh my God, yes.
Apart from being a right choice, I think it was God sent to me, because the day I got married was the day I was emancipated as a woman. There was no difference between him and me.
This is what Nelson Mandela had to say about Walter.
Our comrade Walter was a man who was afraid of women.
Their love blossomed, and so did her education. So she finished her training in 1944, and she got married in 1944. Talk about winning. They ended up having 3 children. Her story is very long, so I decided to not add too much unnecessary information. So I'm not going to get too deep into her children, but she did have 3 children with Walter, and they lived happily ever after, actually.
One of South Africa's greatest love stories, one that transcended barriers of time and strife. Soulmates to the very end.
It's a great joy to actually see love happening in like a soft, way, instead of like the hardships that we actually get to find out about the political leaders, blah, blah, blah. But they were actually very in love. And they moved to Orlando West, which is actually described as a suburb in Soweto. So I guess they were coining it. Real estate agent on one side, a nurse on the other side. Oh, another interesting fact I wanted to say about their marriage in 1944 is that Nelson Mandela was Walter's best man. And Nelson Mandela's first wife was also one of the bridesmaids. And Walter and Nelson Mandela actually had a great relationship. And they were friends until like the end when they literally passed away. So the Mandelas and the Sisulus were actually very close.
Fortunately for the women of South Africa, they've been in the struggle waging the struggle hand in hand with the men. There's never been any difference, except that what is more important on the side of the women is that their side, which is more vulnerable to any oppression, the side of the home, the children, and how to bring up the children under such conditions.
So because this part needs me to speak about Walter in order for us to understand Albertina, I have no choice but to speak about the husband and also the political climate of what was going on in the 1940s. So 1943, Walter joins the ANC Youth League. And then in 1948, the National Party wins the national elections and implements good neighborliness, aka apartheid.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness, accepting that there are differences between people. But while these differences exist, and you have to acknowledge them, at the same time, you can live together, aid one another, but that it can best be done when you act as good neighbors always do.
And so the world moved from not there being apartheid to apartheid being implemented. And what this meant is the fact that the activists who were actually fighting for Black rights now had to actively be fighting a new system which was called apartheid. And how did these things actually affect Albertina? So when she moved to Johannesburg, she was just a devout Catholic and was not particularly invested in the struggle. Her mind changed as she experienced racism for herself, working in the non-European wing of the Johannesburg General Hospital, as well as the introduction of apartheid by the National Party. Also, not forgetting that she was actually in a relationship with Walter Sisulu, who was an active anti-apartheid activist. So those things helped her change. And as the years progressed, she herself became an active member of the anti-apartheid movement. So in 1946, she actually joined the ANC Women's League as a member. And then there was something called the Defiance Campaign in 1952. And this was just a passive strike against the past laws that were implemented by the apartheid government. And Mama Albertina Sisulu was very much aware of her life at this time. And she says that she didn't want to get actively involved in the politics, because if she did get involved, it would mean that the children would not lose one parent, but two parents. And she continued with her life as a nurse and a midwife, and also being an ANC member until she couldn't anymore. And during this time, her husband had to forgo his job as a real estate agent because now his full focus was on the anti-apartheid struggle. And this meant that Mama Albertina Sisulu had to be the breadwinner of the household, as well as the primary caregiver of the children. But even in her stance to not be actively participating in the anti-apartheid government because she wanted her children to at least have one parent, she actually did support the movement and also supported the boycotting of the Bantu Education Act, amongst other acts. And then in 1954, she actually joined FEDSO, which was the Federation of South African Women. The first physical presence of her being present in a demonstration comes in 1956, where she was present at the Women's March to Pretoria. Yes, that Women's March.
It was a watershed moment. A 20,000 stronghold revolting against past laws.
And that was in 1956. So, despite her initial stance that she would support her husband's activism, she was in essence forced because now things were happening in real life and she couldn't ignore it. And despite all of these things happening, she was still very much a nurse and a midwife. And then in 1958, she actually got arrested for the first time for participating in another march against past laws. And she got Nelson Mandela to represent her because Nelson Mandela was actually a lawyer. And she won the case and was acquitted. Then in the 1960s, she helped the ANC to recruit nurses to join a newly formed independent hospital. She was also involved in the Sharpeville massacre and other public demonstrations that were fighting against the apartheid government. Her husband at this time kept getting detained and getting released. They actually became targets of the apartheid government and they were harassed and there were raids in their house in Orlando West all the time. And this meant that the family was not safe. We actually did speak about trauma, but I'm not going to get into it in this episode because Mama Albertina's story is very long. But again, she went into this relationship innocent, in love, and then because of the circumstances around apartheid, around the National Party, and her own experience, she had to be involved. And she did get involved, and it kept getting deeper and deeper. Because the ANC now had started the armed struggle with Umkhonto weSizwe, it meant that the guys had to go under for training. In 1963, Walter Sisulu actually went under to go get his Umkhonto weSizwe training. When Walter went under, they actually arrested Umama Albertina for her husband. I don't know why, but the law's name is like 90-day detention. I don't know what that means. Like they could just detain you because they can't find her husband. So she was in solitary confinement up until they apprehended her husband. And this is in 1963. So when Walter was found with Nelson Mandela and them, because this leads to the treason trial, in 1963, 1964, she was released and sent home. And I kept asking myself, how is the Queen keeping a job and then being in and out of prison, being in and out of activism and protest? I don't know, but again, that independence, resilience, and strength that she learned in her childhood to make sure that the job is done. After Walter gets apprehended by the South African police, the Rivonia trial actually starts.
Mandela was not alone in standing firm against the apartheid system. 9 other anti-apartheid activists stood trial at the so-called Palace of Justice in Pretoria. They were Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Raymond Mhlaba, Ahmed Katrada, and Arthur Goldrich, Dennis Goldberg, Lionel Bestein, Elias Motsoaledi, and Andrew Mlangeni. This group was arrested on the Liliesleaf farm in Rivonia, north of Johannesburg, where they were meeting as the newly formed wing of Umkhonto weSizwe. It is where Mandela and his companion lived in disguise.
Oh, by the way, the Rivonia trial gave us one of Nelson Mandela's most famous speeches. I have fought against white domination. I have fought against black domination. You know that one. If you don't, you're not a South African. I swear to God.
The day Nelson gave evidence, it was so terrible to watch.
The idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
That made everybody shiver. When they finished, crowds started. It was just drizzling, and it became dark and cold. You know, that day was one of the days I cannot describe how it felt like.
Now I look at the judge, and I find that the judge is shaken. And I say, well, the only thing that would make a judge shake is he knows that they're going to be sentenced to death.
The Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Uthant, wrote a letter to Verwoerd in South Africa to say that if you in South Africa go ahead and demand the death penalty and execute the Rivonia trialists, that is Nelson Mandela and the others, then it'll be impossible for the international community to resist the pressures for economic sanctions.
The crime of which the accused have been convicted, crime of conspiracy, is in essence one of high treason. Giving the matter very serious consideration, I have decided not to impose the supreme penalty, which in a case like this would usually be the proper penalty.
People were weeping with joy that they had not received the death sentence. A life sentence for the Rivonia trialists was one of the biggest boosts to us in the underground, giving us a sense that we could go on fighting and we would win one day.
But anyway, after all of that, they were sent to Robben Island for life imprisonment. And now Umama Albertina was like, oh my God, it is me, myself, and I, and these children.
Our attitude was, we can't escape the death sentence. Let us disappear under a cloud of glory so that those who remain behind us should know what leadership demands.
The men, when they were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, there were two main concerns among most of them: the safety of their wives and the education of their children.
Mama Albertina Sisulu actually got banned herself for like 17 years for her involvement in the anti-apartheid movement. She was still working at this time, so I guess she couldn't overtly oppose the apartheid and the government, but she worked, you know, the guys kept working in the shadows. She was part of that. She got involved where she could, in ways that she could, without the risk of actually getting arrested and sent to prison, because her biggest fear was her children not having any parents. And now with Walter being in prison for life in Robben Island, if she also gets in prison, it was actually going to be that. So in 1981, where she actually gets unbanned, her first thing to do was to actually have a speech commemorating the Women's March. Isn't that a 360? Because her initial involvement, the first time she actually got present in anti-apartheid movements, was the 1956 Women's March to Pretoria. And then when she eventually gets unbanned for the first time in 17 years, she actually speaks at a commemoration of this march. And I was like, oh my God, 360. Behold, in 1982, she actually gets banned again. Crazy, right? But then at this time, they're already having conversations about reviving the, remember FEDSAW, the Federation of South African Women? They wanted to have like a similar structure. But then now they had to rename it because that organization was banned. So they were working on that. And this new organization was going to be called the United Democratic Movement, UDF. Is it UDF or UDM? Yeah, UDF. UDM is the other political party with Bangana Tata. Yes, in 1983, she actually retires from nursing and gets her pension money. So this means now she can focus on her anti-apartheid stance. Earlier on in 1983, there was actually a funeral for Rose. I'll put Rose's full name because I can't see this color on my notes. So Rose was an ANC member. And then later on that year, the ANC actually used this funeral that Mama Albertina Sisulu helped organize to actually say that they were using that funeral to further advance the ANC agenda and propaganda. And you remember the ANC was banned and they couldn't talk about it. They couldn't say anything about it. And because of that, the courts were like, yeah, no, you can actually charge her for something. And this charge was called the Suppression of Communism Act. And she was actually sent to prison in 1983. And she was in solitary confinement. But then the UDF didn't stop on their side. They continued. And in August, she actually, in her absence, got nominated as the president of UDF. In 1984, the case of that Suppression of Communism Act around Rose's funeral actually was concluded, and she was found guilty and sent to prison for 4 years. But in the same time, she actually won an appeal for that case and was actually released on bail pending an appeal. And this case went on until she was acquitted in 1987. And then after going on pension in 1983, she started working for Dr. Abu Baker Asfat, who was the leader of the Azania People Organization. So she went from working in the public sector to working in the private sector for this guy. He was also actively involved in the fight against the apartheid government. And Umama Albertina Sisulu worked there up until he got killed in 1989 by the South African police forces. In 1989, things were starting to get loose with the apartheid government because there's been background talks about abolishing apartheid and. So she actually gets a passport and is able to travel overseas. And she goes on this tour to the Americas and the United Kingdom to speak to the powers about the effects of apartheid and how they can help the Black people in South Africa to actually be liberated from apartheid. The ANC was unbanned and the prisoners were actually released, and ANC members that were in exile could actually come home. So we had people like Ora Tambo coming back, and then we had people like Walter Sisulu being released from Robben Island and Nelson Mandela as well. This was now the beginning of the liberation here in South Africa, leading to democracy in 1994. After the unbanning of the ANC, things had to go full speed again because now they could continue with the work that they have started. In 1991, the ANC Women's League actually works on reestablishing itself, and they have their first annual conference since the unbanning where they have to elect new leaders. And in this time, she actually did not want to be the president of the ANC Women's League. Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela did put her name in the hat, but unfortunately, Mama Albertina Sisulu was not endorsing her. They had their little drama and their differences regarding how they were both fighting apartheid. I'm not going to get into Mama Winnie and the whole soccer league and Stompy and all those things. But because of those things and how she was seen and viewed, I'm talking about Mama Madikizela Mandela, it actually created a wedge between her and Mama Albertina Sisulu when he didn't win. The lady that Mama Albertina Sisulu actually endorsed did win. I will link her picture and name here. Because she didn't want to be the actual president of the ANC Women's League, she was actually voted the ANC Women's League deputy president, and she was the deputy for one term from 1991 until 1993. Also at the same time, the ANC actually was working on reestablishing itself, so the same way that the ANC Women's League was doing. She was elected to serve as a member of the National Executive Committee, the NEC, and she did this for one term. This means that she actually served the ANC Women's League as a deputy president and also served the ANC as a National Executive Committee member at the same time. And then when it was time for re-elections in 1993 for the Women's League, she actually declined a re-election. And also with the ANC in 1994, she actually declined a re-election to be part of the NEC.
It's wonderful to see them there. It was actually quite a strange concept when my granddad came out of jail and everything, to see them both sitting together and talking and like nothing, like they'd never been apart, you know. It's actually quite it was incredible. And just to see them, and they're very much in love, which you don't find very often nowadays with even with younger couples. I think they're an amazing couple. I really, really do. They're really incredible.
Mr. Chairman, I nominate Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela for election as president. Thank you, sir.
And then democracy comes. So now we are in 1994. In 1994, she actually endorsed Nelson Mandela to be the president, and so did her husband, Walter Sisulu. So they both endorsed Nelson Mandela. And they were also voted in to become members of the National Assembly. And they served in the National Assembly of the post-democratic South Africa under the ANC leadership from 1994 until 1999. Also in 1994, the TRC talks started. So the first one was the Winnie Madikizela Soccer Club Stompy death, and she got involved in that. And then the second one was the death of her boss, Dr. Asfat, who was killed by the South African police in his practice, and she was there. So she got involved in those two TRC talks. After serving the South African Parliament post-democracy from 1994 to 1999, she decided to retire from public life and live happily ever after with her boo. I'm sure she was happy. I'm actually sure she was happy. I don't know what age she was at this time. I'll put the age at the bottom. But remember, she had actually retired from her actual job as a nurse in 1983. So this might have been like a lot for her to deal and manage. And during her elections on the ANC Women's League, on the ANC as members of parliament, blah, 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 she actually didn't particularly want to do it, but then she felt like she had to do it because she wanted to honor the people that saw her work day and night against the apartheid regime and actually wanted her to be a participant and a member of the creation of the new South Africa and the creation of a democratic South Africa. And she did a stellar job. We don't hear a lot of complaints about her.
One of South Africa's greatest love stories. One that transcended barriers of time and strife. Soulmates to the very end.
They actually moved to Linden in Randburg as a family, where she was actually with her husband, and their children are old at the time. And she was also a grandmother, and she lived a very quiet life, popping up here and then to support the ANC. And then in 2003, unfortunately, Walter Sisulu actually did pass away. And then in 2011, at the age of 92, she actually did pass away.
Thousands turned out for the funeral of one of South Africa's leading anti-apartheid figures. President Jacob Zuma called Albertina Sisulu a national heroine at the service in Soweto.
And on what would have been her 100th birthday, the ANC actually did celebrate her centenary. So
the Albertina Sisulu centenary celebrations are well underway in Kimberley in the Northern Cape. Hundreds of people are in attendance to celebrate the life and legacy of Ms. Sisulu. She would have turned 100 years old today.
I like Mama Albertina Sisulu because she is the first woman that I covered that was actively involved in a struggle in her own will and accordance. And I like the fact that she had resilience, she had strength, and she didn't let the apartheid government stop her. She didn't waver or change because she really did believe in South Africa and the freedom of all its people. So, Enkosi Mama Albertina Nontsikelelo Sisulu, we are grateful for your contribution. And I will play this clip from her.
You must remember me going in and out jail up to the last case of treason trial, being the only woman amongst 15 men, not fighting for my own interest, for my own family, but for the oppressed people of South Africa as a whole.
And with that said, we have no further information to give to the masses. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode. Please comment, subscribe, tell your friends, and let's share these beautiful stories about our history and our essence. And I do this for educational purposes. And I'm so grateful that you are here until the end. I will see you guys next week. Thank you.